I have commanded warships for 40 years. I have led invasions across 9 star systems. I have broken sieges, crushed rebellions, and accepted the surrender of species far older than my own. In all that time, across all those campaigns, I have never once given the order to retreat. Until that day in the Helios corridor. My name is Tyverus Aeon, and I was the fleet commander of the Burning Chorus, the largest combined armada the Vithari Ascendancy had ever assembled. 1,400 warships drawn from 5 allied species, arranged in perfect formation, carrying enough firepower to reduce a continent to glass. We were on our way to seize a minor human colony called Ardennis Prime. Taking it would cut off humanity's only trade route to the galactic core. It was a clean strategy, a simple one, the kind of operation that ends not with a battle, but with a signature on a surrender document. I remember standing on the bridge of my flagship, the Pale Horizon, watching the fleet stretch across the void like a living constellation. My officers moved with quiet confidence. My vassal captains sent their readiness confirmations in steady rhythm. There was almost a festive quality to the air. We outnumbered anything the humans could possibly send. Their navy was scattered across a dozen border skirmishes. Skirmishes we had deliberately provoked for exactly this purpose. Everything was going according to plan. Then my sensor officer spoke up from his station, and his voice carried something I had not heard from him before: uncertainty. "Commander, I am detecting a slipspace signature at the far edge of the corridor. A single contact." I barely looked up. A single contact meant a scout, perhaps a courier drone. I told him to log it and continue standard operations. "Sir," he said again, and this time I noticed the change in his posture. He was leaning away from his console, as though the information on his screen was something he did not want to be near. "The contact has resolved. It is a warship. Human registry." I walked to his station and looked at the display myself. One ship, one single ship sitting at the mouth of the Helios corridor like a stone dropped in front of an advancing river. Its designation translated, roughly, to INS Consequence. I will admit that my first reaction was amusement. I ordered the fleet to hold position and let the ship approach. I wanted to see what kind of desperate gesture this was. A lone warship against 1,400. It had to be a diplomatic envoy, perhaps even a surrender. My intelligence officer, Leitha, pulled the ship's file from our database. She began reading it aloud, and as she did, the quiet confidence on the bridge began to thin like mist under a hot sun. The Consequence was not an ordinary warship. It belonged to something the humans called the Vanguard Initiative, a class of ships that were never deployed in groups because one was considered sufficient. The file listed its recorded engagements: colony sieges broken, pirate fleets erased, a Krathosi dreadnought, the largest warship in known space, disabled and captured in one piece. Every engagement in the file ended the same way. The enemy either surrendered or ceased to exist, and nothing in the record lasted longer than 11 minutes. I told Liathi to close the file. I told my officers that reputation was not the same as capability. I told them that one ship, no matter how advanced, could not overcome 1,400. I believed it when I said it. I think some of them believed it too. Then the Consequence opened a communication channel, and a human voice filled the bridge. It was calm and unhurried, belonging to a woman who identified herself as Captain Marin Drask. She did not threaten us. She did not raise her voice. She read a single statement. "This corridor is under the protection of the United Earth Navy. You have 6 hours to withdraw your fleet to pre-aggression borders. This offer will not be repeated. There will be no negotiation." The channel closed. I waited for something more. A list of demands. A show of reinforcements. Anything. But there was nothing more. She had said what she came to say, and now she was simply waiting. I ordered the fleet to continue its advance. Within the hour, the cracks began to show. Reports came in from across the armada. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could point to and call disobedience. Just a heaviness in the responses. Slight delays in confirming maneuvers. The kind of hesitation that spreads through a fleet the way cold spreads through metal. I called a command conference with my senior captains. It was there that one of the Okalin captains, a scarred old veteran named Roth, spoke out of turn. "My people fought humans once, Commander," he said. "Only once. We do not speak of it." I demanded he explain. He told me that 20 years earlier, an Oalin strike force had raided a human colony transport. 46 warships, standard operation. The humans did not send a fleet in response. They sent a single Vanguard-class ship. It arrived. It broadcast one warning. The Orwellan ignored it. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. Every single one of the 46 Orwellan ships was destroyed. The Vanguard ship showed no detectable damage. And then, and this was the part that made the bridge go absolutely silent, the human ship answered the Orwellan rescue beacons. It recovered the survivors. It treated their wounded. It returned them to Orwellan space with a message that read, "We have no quarrel with your people. Do not create one." No one spoke for a long time after that. I pushed forward anyway. I told myself that 46 was not 1400. I told myself that numbers still mattered. But privately, in the part of my mind where honesty lives, I was beginning to understand something uncomfortable. If a single ship could erase 46 warships in 4 minutes without taking a scratch, then the question was not whether I had enough ships. The question was what that ship was truly capable of, and I did not have the answer. The first hour of the 6 passed with both sides motionless. The consequence did not raise its shields. It did not power its weapons. It simply sat there in the corridor, perfectly still, and somehow that stillness was more unsettling than any display of aggression. During the second hour, I ordered deep scans of the ship. The results came back confused and contradictory. The hull was made of something not in our materials database. The energy readings made no sense. One of my technicians suggested, very quietly, that perhaps our instruments were not failing to detect the ship's power. Perhaps the ship's power was simply beyond what our instruments were built to measure. I told him to keep that theory to himself. In the third hour, the McCarthy contingent, 200 warships, announced they were withdrawing from the operation. Their admiral sent me a private message. We joined this alliance to share in victory, not to discover whether a legend is true. Our debt to the ascendancy does not extend to this. I could not stop them without shattering the alliance. I let them go. 1,200 ships remained. Then, in the fourth hour, the consequence moved for the first time. It repositioned itself slowly, almost lazily, turning to face the fleet head-on. And then it did something that none of my officers could immediately explain. A field of some kind expanded from its hull, visible, shimmering, spreading across 1,000 kilometers like heat rising from desert sand. Every ship the field touched experienced the same thing at the same instant. A total systems blackout. Weapons, shields, navigation, life support. Everything went dark for exactly 3 seconds, and then returned to normal. No damage, no casualties, just darkness, and then light again. A text message appeared on every command console in the fleet simultaneously. It read, "That was not an attack. That was a calibration pulse. I needed to confirm how many of you there are. I have confirmed. You now have 2 hours." That was the moment the fleet began to fall apart. The Droth contingent broke formation first, their ships scattering like startled animals. Then, the Suhari followed. I stood on my bridge and watched 600 ships peel away in ragged retreat, their captains flooding the communication channels with apologies, excuses, and prayers to gods I did not recognize. My own Vithari officers stood rigid at their stations, but I could smell their fear. My species produces a bitter chemical scent when we are afraid, and the bridge was thick with it. 400 Vithari warships remained, still a powerful force by any normal standard. But this was not a normal standard. The 6th hour came and went, the deadline expired, and the consequence did nothing. And no weapons fire, no second warning, no ultimatum. It simply waited. I realized, standing there on my bridge with the smell of my own crew's fear in my lungs, that this was the most terrifying thing of all. The ship was not in a hurry. It was not nervous. It was not bluffing. It had given a deadline not as a threat, but as a courtesy, a genuine, earnest opportunity for us to survive. And now that the deadline had passed, it was simply ready for whatever came next. I returned to my private quarters. I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about my career, my legacy, the 40 years of victories that had brought me to this moment. I thought about what it would mean to retreat, the shame, the political consequences, the end of everything I had built. And then I pulled up every piece of intelligence the Ascendancy had ever collected on human military doctrine, and I found a pattern that made my blood go cold. Humans do not send Vanguard ships as a first response. They send them as a final response. The presence of the consequence in this corridor meant that somewhere in the human command structure, someone had decided that this single choke point mattered enough to deploy their most absolute instrument. Not a fleet, not a show of force, a single, quiet promise that whatever came through this corridor uninvited would not come through it again. And then, the second realization came, and it was worse than the first. The consequence had not fired a single shot. It had not scratched the paint on a single one of my ships. And yet it had already reduced my fleet by more than 2/3. Captain Drask had won this engagement without fighting it. Her weapon was never the ship's cannons, or that shimmering field. Her weapon was reputation. Decades of encounters just like this, where the humans offered a chance to walk away, and then completely erased anyone who chose to stay. Every survivor they had ever returned, every crew they had ever healed and sent home, had become a story. And those stories had become a wall that no fleet in the galaxy could breach. Mercy, I understood then, was not weakness. It was the most devastating strategy I had ever encountered. You cannot build a reputation for being unstoppable if you leave no one alive to talk about it. I went back to the bridge. My officers looked at me with eyes that were asking a question they were too loyal to speak aloud. I opened a fleet-wide channel. I did not call it a retreat. I called it a strategic repositioning. I gave the order to withdraw to pre-aggression borders, exactly as Captain Drask had specified. No one questioned me. I think they were relieved. As the fleet turned and began its long journey away from the corridor, a narrow beam communication channel opened. Private, directed only at my ship. Captain Drask's voice came through one final time, and it was the same calm, unhurried tone as before. Commander, you made the right call. For what it is worth, your formation discipline was impressive. Your people are good soldiers. Do not waste them. The channel closed. I did not respond. There was nothing to say. The journey home took 11 days. The fleet was intact. Every ship, every crew member, every piece of equipment accounted for. We had not lost a single life, and yet we returned as a defeated force. I could see it in the way my officers walked, in the silence that filled the mess halls, in the way no one could quite meet anyone else's eyes. I wrote my report to the Ascendancy High Council. I did not soften it. I did not make excuses. I included every detail. The defections, the calibration pulse, the fear. I knew it would end my career, and I did not care. Some truths are more important than careers. At the end of the report, I added a single recommendation. A warning that I intended to deliver in person if they would let me stand before the Council one last time. It said, "Do not go to war with Earth. Not because we would lose, but because they would only need to send one ship to win, and they would still have the rest of their fleet waiting behind it." I filed the report. I sat back in my chair. I stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the dark between galaxies, the consequence was still flying, still waiting, still ready, and I thanked every god I knew that I would never have to face it again.